And really, Sally, today is Royal Day and this several-day visit. This is the one where he'll meet members of the royal family. He'll have tea, for example, with Charles and Camilla, and then he'll have the state banquet here at Buckingham Palace. Now we can just see Air Force One coming into view. Here we go. The specially kitted out Boeing 747 that's bringing Donald Trump. It's the White House in the air. It's the Oval Office in the air, bringing Donald Trump in for his state visit. Not, of course, his first visit to the UK. He's been here many times, but this is his first visit as a state visit of the US president to the UK at the invitation of Her Majesty's government. So this is the approach of Air Force One to Stansted Airport, which is about 50 kilometres north of the capital. From here, military helicopters will take the US president into London. So his plane just approaching now. Donald Trump, the First Lady Melania Trump also with him. All his adult children will also be on this trip, and we know that it's quite exciting for the Trump family, the Trump clan, to be meeting members of the royal family too, whether it's the Queen, Charles and Camilla, William and Kate, Prince Andrew. They are looking forward to that royal meeting as Air Force One comes in and touches down at Stansted Airport. So Donald Trump has arrived in the United Kingdom on his state visit, his formal state visit to the UK. Only the third US president to be accorded this honour of a state visit, although the Queen has met nearly all modern American presidents. She met George Bush, she has welcomed Barack Obama, and she will be welcoming Donald and Melania Trump to Buckingham Palace. Now they've touched down, they'll be here within the next few hours. So there you go, the United States of America, Air Force One, has landed. We've heard some comments from Donald Trump as he boarded Air Force One at Andrews Air Force Base a few hours ago. He made comments about how important a trip this was, how exciting it was. He said that there's a lot going on in the UK at the moment. He's not wrong, with the UK looking to Brexit, to some momentous changes in its international alliances. Donald Trump has had a lot to say about that. He may even have quite a lot to say about who should be the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, as this is the last week of Theresa May's active premiership with the Conservative Party leadership underway. But as he taxis in, as Air Force One comes in to Stansted Airport, this first day is very much about the ceremony. It's about the formal welcome, and everything will have been planned minutely. All the details of the welcomes, the transfers, the who steps forward first, who does he meet first, at what point does he meet the Queen, all the arrangements that have been made for the formal banquet in Buckingham Palace behind me, all that will have been poured over for weeks and weeks. So many officials, the entourages involved in this, so much protocol in what is a state visit. This is the state visit of the US president, whereas last year's trip was a business visit by Donald Trump, when, of course, he was greeted with ceremony. He met the Queen, as you'll remember. But this is a step up. It is the highest honour, really, that the British state, in the form of the Queen, can accord to the US president. I'm joined here by Kaylin Birch, who's global economist for the Economist Intelligence Unit. Economist Intelligence Unit. Let me get that right, Kaylin.
It's a mouthful.
And it is about ceremony, but there's a lot at stake. I mean, this is a very important alliance.
Yes, it is an extremely important alliance, and the US has seen ties with some of its more traditional, long-standing partners deteriorate over the last few months to the last year, and some of that through active US trade policy. So the US-UK relationship is all the more kind of special at that moment. The UK obviously going through a difficult Brexit transition and facing a conservative kind of power change within the party. The US is fresh off of kind of strong economic data and what the president certainly views as kind of a winning move, and the US trying to trade war on others. But at the same time, while the Trump administration is coming in on a very confident note, there are certainly risks looming to the economy there as well. The US would benefit from strong ties with one of its allies.
I think it's fair to say Donald Trump is reshaping quite a lot of the US trade allegiances. I mean, when you think of NAFTA, the threats he's made about tariffs against Mexico just in the last few days, And so there could be some hard bargaining between the US and the UK, even as friends.
Yes, definitely. And that's something we've seen with this administration. Even friends aren't immune to really tough kind of negotiations. And I think there are a few key issues, even within the trade relationship specifically, that will be interesting to see. Agriculture is one. The US and the EU more broadly are working on their trade negotiations. But again, we've seen kind of if not a breakdown, kind of certainly a loss of trust on both sides.
And what are the differences there? What does the US want that the UK may be reluctant to give?
Well, I think so. Including agricultural goods in the docket of things to be discussed is already a big step forward in the US's eyes, if that were to come about. The US-EU talks have put agriculture straight off the board, not to be discussed, not included, and the US would very much like that to be, especially given that agricultural areas of the US tend on average to be heavy Republican voting areas, and US farmers have also been some of the most negatively impacted by the war with China, uncertainty over NAFTA
So Donald Trump would like to be able to say to these farmers, we've got you another market, we've opened up the UK to you.
Look what we've won for you through our direct negotiations. So anything benefiting agriculture is huge.
We're just watching, there you go, we have a close-up picture for you, the seal, the presidential seal on the side of Air Force One, this specially converted jumbo jet here. And we know that the plane which was carrying the president and his team can carry, in fact, 76 passengers. There are, we know, 85 telephones on board, all sorts of computer connections, military equipment. Air Force One is actually classed as a military aircraft. It could withstand an air attack if it had to. It is the flying Oval Office. There is so much that we know there about all the quarters that exist for the President, the First Lady and their staff. There's if they need, they can have a hospital, a surgery, operations carried out en route. It can refuel mid-air. It's an incredible machine that has just landed at Stansted Airport, and you can see the steps there, everything in position for Donald Trump to arrive. He's been to the UK before. He's visited his golf course. He visited the UK on a business trip last year, but this is the state visit of the American president at the invitation of Her Majesty's government. So as we were saying earlier, everything is a step up. There's more to be organised, more protocol boxes to be ticked. Everything has to be just so. At Buckingham Palace behind me, I've been here since 5 this morning. Everything is extremely shipshape. Everything's in place. And just to let you know, as we await Donald Trump coming out of that door, he arrives in style, talking about the Mayor of London, Sadiq Khan, tweeting that Sadiq Khan, who by all accounts has done a terrible job as Mayor of London, has been foolishly nasty to the visiting President of the United States, by far the most important ally of the United Kingdom. So just as the door pulls back and we're waiting for the President to come out, he's already announced himself with a tweet about the terrible job that the Mayor of London is doing. The Mayor of London, I should say, also not wasting any warm words on the President, published an editorial yesterday in one of the newspapers here saying that Donald Trump was an example of the global move to the far right. He didn't stand for the sort of values that Londoners believe in. He shouldn't be hosted by the British government or be here in London, and other leading members of the opposition Labour Party have also said they feel that it's a waste of money and a shame that Donald Trump should come in. So there are very divided views on the fact that Donald Trump is arriving, has just touched down, and he will helicopter into London. He'll come over our heads here to Buckingham Palace, but if he looks down, he'll probably be able to see protesters. And certainly as he moves around by helicopter tomorrow, there'll be a lot of protesters out on the streets, a lot of divided opinion. So many aspects to this trip, this several-day trip of Donald Trump to the United Kingdom. And we'll keep you up to date with everything that's happening as we watch that door intently for you. I should also say that if you're also looking at the BBC Online, we have a live page. We're refreshing it all the time with some of the quotes, some of the tweets, some of the information and the intel we've got from onboard Air Force One, and a little bit more about what to expect from a state visit. You know, what is a state visit? Why is it different from a business visit? Who has the Queen hosted in the past? And what kind of protocol and pitfalls lie ahead over the next few days for Donald and Melania Trump and their children, Donald Jr., Eric Trump, Tiffany Trump, and Ivanka Trump, we know, is already here. She's been posting on Instagram from her visit to the V&A. I think she's been to the Christian Dior exhibition there. So the first daughter is already in town and will be joined fairly soon by the first couple themselves. So there we have the door open, awaiting Donald Trump and Melania Trump. Rather extraordinary that that tweet should come through just as we are waiting for the president to step onto British soil. I don't think I can remember any precedent for quite such an announcement, that as he arrives and comes into the capital city, he talks about the Mayor of London as a man who, by all accounts, has done a terrible job and has been foolishly nasty in inverted commas, because it is a bit of a word of the week, to the visiting president of the United States. Donald Trump goes on to say of the Mayor of London, he is a stone-cold loser who should focus on crime in London, not me. He reminds me, this is Donald Trump speaking, very much of our dumb and incompetent Mayor of New York, Bill de Blasio, who's also done a terrible job, only half his height. Well, there you go. In any event, says Donald Trump, I look forward to being a great friend to the United Kingdom, and I'm looking forward very much to my visit, landing now, so we got a commentary there on Twitter from inside Air Force One, and presumably all readying themselves, knowing that the cameras are trained on that door as he steps down to begin his trip. It's going to be very busy. Kaylin Birch with me from the Economist Intelligence Unit. This is a royal day, but there are also going to be quite a few occasions with Theresa May, for example, where he can talk policy, and he knows what he wants from this trip.
He does, and I think probably today the pomp and circumstance will smooth the way into serious talks tomorrow. But I wouldn't expect that to make tomorrow maybe any happier. We're in an interesting position now where Theresa May will be greeting him, talking through policy, but she won't be the one from next Monday.
She's a lame duck, we'll be blunt.
Yes, truly. And this will be maybe more of a kind of a relationship building time. The US government will lay down their priorities, maybe not be so specific that they then have shown their hand when they do enter into possible trade negotiations or new security talks with the government that follows Theresa May's. So they'll be looking to put some landmarks down, but perhaps being a little bit cautious as they don't quite know who they're going to be dealing with yet.
And Kaylin, I was just reading out a tweet that Donald Trump sent about the Mayor of London, Sadiq
Yes.
Khan. You were listening as I read that out. Extraordinary.
Not pulling any punches, you could say. No, we've seen already, as of last year's business visit, as you said, not a state visit, but still a very highly politicized and very publicized visit. And we saw the initial kind of blows between President Trump and Mayor Khan then. So we wouldn't have expected that to have changed this year, but that's a pretty strong opening salvo before even getting off the plane to make what essentially is a personal attack to the Mayor of London. But this is Mr. Trump's style. We've known this for a long time. The question is, will that color the rest of the day?
Well, I suppose also Sadiq Khan has made it clear that he certainly doesn't welcome Donald Trump here. And we've heard from Sadiq Khan. I also saw just in the last few hours from Emily Thornberry, the shadow foreign secretary. She was saying that this is a waste of taxpayers' money, and why are we welcoming Donald Trump when he doesn't stand for the values that we do. Now, given all this tension and rancour, the Queen tends to glide above it all, doesn't she?
Yes,
that is
exactly.
her job.
And I suppose that is a good way to start this visit too, to kind of with, again, the exciting kind of state events and lots of just personal events rather than real policy talk could set us off on a slightly more positive tone for tomorrow. We all know, again, Trump is fresh back from a trip to Japan, where it's also a state visit with lots of pomp and circumstance and sumo wrestling and state dinners. And all of this plays quite well with Trump, but that puts him in a better kind of starting position for tomorrow. We may see a little bit more come out of it, but it's starting off rocky.
Interesting. You wonder what his communications advisors and his personal advisors think when he's, tweeting, we're just landing and I've got a few insults to land on the Mayor of London. As I do say, they must sometimes want to take away the phone, but Donald Trump is Donald Trump and makes his feelings clear. Just for viewers who are joining us on BBC World News, we are watching the door of Air Force One at the moment at Stansted Airport, which is about 35 miles, 50 kilometres or so north of London. And here is the President and First Lady Melania Trump arriving at a very windy Stansted Airport. A wave to those here to greet him as he arrives on his state visit, much anticipated state visit to the United Kingdom at the invitation of Her Majesty's government. This visit, this invitation was the decision of Theresa May and her government, carried out by the Queen, who's hosted, in fact, 112 such visits since she became monarch in 1952. So Her Majesty very accustomed to these visits and to controversial visitors. She is here at Buckingham Palace. At the moment, President Trump and the First Lady are being greeted by the formal party at the foot of the steps of Air Force One, having landed at Stansted Airport. So the first greetings before the President goes to the helicopter, the military helicopter that will whisk him out of Stansted and here to Buckingham Palace. Kaylin Birch, as he got onto Air Force One, President Trump was saying there's a very fine trade deal to be struck between the US and the UK, and that is in everybody's minds. But we were just saying striking such a deal is not a quick or easy matter.
No, it's not. For one reason, that it will take some time to formally set out what the UK's relation to the EU will be following this Brexit process. And then on top of that, starting and ending a trade negotiation in less than a year is really kind of an unbelievable request. Even the renegotiated NAFTA, if we take that as an example, took well over a year and only concluded when it did because the US really accelerated under pressure.
And Donald Trump will have other things on his mind, because one of the matters he'll be thinking about now with the pictures of arriving in the UK and coming to Buckingham Palace. He's into a re-election campaign, he's fundraising, he's rallying. The next presidential election is next November. So, yeah, he's probably got a lot else on his mind as well.
Yeah, I think that the campaign in the next year is really going to start to ramp up. And what does that mean is that Trump will be looking for a win at every turn, but also a short-term win, something that plays well, gives immediate political spin, and not something that's going to be beneficial in 5 years. He doesn't have the luxury of thinking
So these pictures that we're looking at now, Kaylin, when you see President Trump come in and salute, he's being greeted by Robert Johnson just there, the ambassador, and he's going to go to Marine One to be shuttled by helicopter. There he is, approaching Marine One already. This short transit across the tarmac at Stansted Airport, and he will be in the air very quickly, making his way to Buckingham Palace. And Kaylin, these pictures of the arrival as the President of the United States, only the third state visit by a President of the United States to the UK. He's going to want all these pictures to play.
We have to remember the power of the incumbency. Just being the person in office is an enormous boost. The gravitas it gives, kind of the importance of having that platform for your policy. He'll want to use every single one of those photos, yes.
And I can bring in now, I think, our royal correspondent, Johnny Diamond. Johnny, hello.
Hi.
Getting into the helicopter, very swift transit here, and then up and away to Buckingham Palace. Tell us a little bit about what to expect when he gets here.
Well, there'll be the formal welcome when he comes here. I think he's going to have a little bit of downtime, first of all, with the ambassador at the residence in central London. And then he'll come here again by air. Very little time on the roads in London this time. And that's partly, I think mostly, in fact, security and speed. And partly, one suspects, because it gets him away from any of the big protests that there might have been, although they're being fairly severely circumscribed. So he will then come to Buckingham Palace, flying again in Marine One, and he'll be met by Prince Charles and the Duchess of Cornwall, who will then take him from the West Garden to into Buckingham Palace. He'll meet the Queen, and then there will be the most formal side of the welcome, which will be with the Grenadier Guards, the Nijmegen Company of the Grenadier Guards, and there'll be the normal pageantry that we have. There'll be the band of the Grenadier Guards there, and he will inspect the honour guard before he then goes back into the palace and begins a private lunch with the Queen and with Prince Harry.
So all this on camera but not open to the public?
Yep, that's right. All of this on camera, but these parts of the palace are never open to the public, and certainly not for a state visit. It's pretty tightly controlled, as you can imagine.
The one royal whom of course we know will not be meeting the president, is the American royal.
That's right. Yes, Meghan Markle, the Duchess of Sussex, is on maternity leave and will therefore not be meeting the president. It probably avoids a somewhat embarrassing moment. Ms Markle, or the Duchess, had previously criticised the president, describing him as misogynistic and divisive, and he has shot back in his own way. When he was asked about those comments, he said he did not know she was nasty. Comments he then said he hadn't made, but he had made because he'd made them on tape. So a slightly embarrassing moment avoided there, although who knows, there may be some embarrassment when he chats away with the Duchess's husband, which he will do over lunch. But no, otherwise he's meeting a whole range of royals. This isn't just the Queen. He'll be meeting, first of all, the Prince of Wales and the Duchess in this formal welcome. He will go around Westminster Abbey with Prince Andrew, the Queen's son, and the Duke of York as well, who is himself the Colonel of the Grenadier Guards. And then it will be back for tea with the Prince of Wales, and there will be more royals, of course, at the state banquet this evening. So this is the core of the state visit. This is hardly a state visit, mostly a royal visit, and this is what it is about. The action both at Buckingham Palace and then at various other palaces, St James's Palace and Clarence House today.
The royal family know, above all other beings, what it is to have to be diplomatic. And when Charles, the Prince of Wales, our next monarch, meets Donald Trump, that'll be interesting. Wouldn't you love to be a fly on the wall, John?
Oh, look, you'd love to be a fly on the wall on most of these meetings, to be honest. But yes, perhaps most of all, when Prince Charles, the man who has embraced, organic farming, climate change as one of his central issues, meets Donald Trump, who, as far as I understand, has shown little interest in organic food and even less interest in climate change. When they meet, what will they talk about? I mean, there's been all kinds of speculation, and various people have been saying that Prince Charles will bring up climate change with the president. I have to say I wonder about it. Normally they avoid hot political topics. Normally it is questions about horses and joint interests they might have rather than the big political topics of the day. We'll have to wait and see whether we get any readout on the conversation. Most of these things stay very private, but it'll be fascinating. It's also fascinating because their characters are so different. I mean, here is Prince Charles, a pretty stiff and pretty buttoned up Englishman, meeting President Trump, who is the absolute opposite of it. So yes, you want to be in on the meeting with Prince Charles, how you would ache to be in on the lunch with the Queen and with Prince Harry as well, to know what they talk about. But we won't hear any of that.
We'll have a very formal and restrained readout, won't we? Now, Marine One, just in the process of taking off from Stansted Airport. Won't take it long to get down here. It's only about 50 kilometres north, and of course you have the two aircraft going up, and we'll be able to see and hear Marine One coming over towards the US ambassador's residence, not that far away, Johnny. And as you say, a little bit of downtime for the president, but then he's got a pretty full 3 days. Tomorrow is politics day, isn't it?
Yeah, tomorrow is politics day. I mean, it's not brutal politics, and we've heard from a senior administration official in the White House, they're not expecting, in their phrase, any earth-shattering announcements. You know, they were stressing that there are conversations ongoing between the US and the UK the whole time. Don't wait for some astonishing moment about, say, Chinese involvement in Britain's 5G network or anything on trade deals. They are also very aware that the meeting with the Prime Minister is more of a farewell to the Prime Minister. British Prime Minister Theresa May is, of course, about to leave office. She gives up the leadership of her own party on Friday. There'll be a leadership contest. The next person who meets the President will be a very different Prime Minister. So I don't think we can expect huge amounts of the politics. There's also meetings with businessmen in the morning as well.
But just bringing in Kaelin Birch again from the Economist Intelligence Unit, of course there won't be announcements made, for example, on intelligence and Huawei and Chinese connections, but there may well be pressure put on.
I think so. This is the time to signpost. Really, the US can lay out its priorities. They may not be too open about exactly what they want, or certainly not what they'd be willing to give in concession to that, but they'll be laying out the things that are most important to the US. Huawei will be one, future trade talks will be another, security with regard to Iran is yet another issue, climate change and kind of the US backing off of that, perhaps being pressured by the UK, will all be important topics of discussion, but they're really just laying the groundwork for when the real talks begin, if you can say, down the road.
And of course, we don't know who the next Conservative Party leader and Prime Minister is going to be. Johnny, you know a lot about British politics as well as being our royal correspondent. It may be that Boris Johnson, for example, gets to meet the President whilst he's here.
Yeah, and there's been furious speculation over whether Boris Johnson, the former Foreign Secretary, the former Mayor of London, and someone whom President Trump has name-checked repeatedly as a friend and someone whom he thinks would make a good Prime Minister, will get to meet the President or not. You know, then again, there's equal speculation about whether or not that would be a good thing for Mr. Johnson's chances of becoming Prime Minister.
How does it play with the Conservative Party membership, I suppose?
Exactly. You know, there are two electorates. There's the MPs that first of all have to put Mr. Johnson on the ballot paper, and then the Conservative Party electorate. I was talking to one member of Parliament on Saturday who said he didn't think it made a single bit of difference to either of those electorates whether or not there was the endorsement from President Trump. But clearly it is a matter of, it's a huge interest to people, especially politically interested people in the United Kingdom, as to whether this meeting goes on, and it raises Mr. Johnson's profile. It gives some gravitas to a man who is sometimes seen as lacking a little bit of gravitas, lacking a little bit of heft, and it makes him seem like the kind of man who might be able to do a deal with the United States at a time when the United Kingdom will clearly need those kinds of assistance.
Just looking at the tweet again from Donald Trump, where he was talking about Mayor Khan, Sadiq Khan, in pretty forthright terms there, you know, saying just like the dumb Bill de Blasio, as Donald Trump sees it, only half the height, and saying by all accounts Sadiq Khan has done a terrible job as Mayor of London. Not the norm as you come into somebody's city, Kaylin.
No, it really is a firing shot. And I think, again, we saw a very difficult start to that relationship when Trump last visited the UK in 2018 with the protests that were happening there. And a lot of that pressure then was diverted to Mayor Khan. But again, I mean, Trump is not someone to ever pull any shots. This is something we could probably have expected from him.
I must say, I didn't expect it 5 minutes before he landed on Air Force One. That is unusual.
The timing is questionable, as well as the message. But I think, I mean, Trump has probably been a little bit cautious as an individual. We know he is sensitive to events and protests that are against his, I mean, we recently saw when he was in Japan that the USS John McCain had the name of the ship obscured from
which
Mr.
White House
Trump's
officials
view.
have now confirmed was a request.
That's correct. Yeah. If not directly from the president, from White House staff, who would think that would smooth over the visit. Mr. Trump has, you know, an aggressive approach to negotiations, but he has vulnerabilities, if you will, or frustrations, and one of them was with Mayor Khan, and we would expect that not to improve in the near-term future.
But Johnny, with Donald Trump now in the air, he's on his way here. We know he's very flattered, that he's very thrilled, actually, for members of his family to meet members of the royal family. But at the same time, there's this anger and frustration that bubbles over in his Twitter feed.
Yeah, I think, look, there are almost two visits going on at the same time. There is the formal side of this visit, the state side of this visit, the royal side of this visit, which is going to, I think, go very, very smoothly. We saw with the state visit to Japan, President Trump is perfectly able to stay on script. He gave a very, very good speech at the state banquet, which he had, full of cultural sensitivities and sensibilities. He's perfectly able to when he wants to. So there's that side of the visit, the formal side of it. You've then got the political side of the visit, which we've seen in this string of interviews that he's given to various newspapers over the last few days, and then in the tweets which have been coming out, which are extraordinary. And perhaps we've become inured to it a little bit, and we go, oh, well, that's just President Trump. But actually, there are extraordinary interventions in domestic politics of the country that he's visiting, and that is an extraordinary thing to say about the mayor of the city, which he is about to touch down on. So you have these two things going in parallel, which one rocks up against the other, and it's very difficult to see which one will dominate over the next few days.
Yes, which is part of the excitement for us as journalists, and probably part of the utter terror for the courtiers and the diplomats and everybody involved in making this visit, or trying to make this visit, go smoothly. And you were referring to what Donald Trump's been saying over the last few days. Kaylin, part of what he's been saying is giving advice about Brexit. Again, saying, I would have done it differently. Theresa May got it wrong. I would not pay the £39 billion, $50 billion. I mean, that's quite an intervention to make just before you fly over.
It is. It's one thing to weigh in on domestic politics, as you said, on electoral questions. We've seen Mr. Trump do this, for example, in Israel, speaking, you know, in benefit of Netanyahu example. Again, it's one thing to say this is just what President Trump does. to step back. It really is a remarkable shift in terms of what US presidents have done in the past. But it's yet another to talk about kind of the approach that the UK is taking to its Brexit negotiations, to suggest policy matters, to suggest not paying something that you're legally obligated to pay is a pretty remarkable statement. To suggest suing the EU, this is all very much in his playbook. But you're right, we would be amiss to just kind of brush it off. This is a remarkable intervention. And something we're going to see more of in the coming days, even with regard to internal Conservative Party questions.
Let's turn this round. Johnny, as our royal correspondent, the Queen is used to entertaining, to greeting somewhat controversial figures. I mean, she's had Vladimir Putin here, she's had Chinese President Xi here. Sometimes our viewers say, A, why have you invited Donald Trump? And B, how will the Queen cope? And I guess the answer is she'll cope magnificently, probably.
Yeah, I mean, let's deal with coping first of all. It won't be a problem for the Queen in the slightest. She has done, well, more than 100 of these state visits and several hundred working visits, drop-ins, teas, dinners, you name it. And it's simply not a problem for her because it's the job. And it sounds to many people like a rather bizarre job, but it is what she does, is meeting, greeting, saying hello, having conversations. That protocol helps. The fact that most people are expected, frankly, to wait for her to raise up a conversation topic. There are relatively brief audiences going on at the time, but this is what she does, and it's not going to be a problem for her. And frankly, she's met far, quote, worse, unquote, than President Trump. People make all kinds of accusations about President Trump. He was actually democratically elected, unlike many of the people that she's had here as a state visit. Nicolae Ceausescu, the former dictator of Romania, springs to mind. Mobutu, the former dictator of what was then Zaire, what's now the Democratic Republic of Congo, also springs to mind. These are people who at various times have butchered and shoved around their populations in a cruel manner that would put Mr. Trump into a completely different category if he did. So there's none of that. Now, the question also is of why is he coming? And that is because he is invited because he is the president, not because he's Donald Trump, but because he's the president. It's worth remembering on Wednesday, he will go with the Queen to Portsmouth on the south coast of England for a commemoration of the 75th anniversary of D-Day, when American, British and Canadian troops went across the water to try and throw the Nazis out of occupied Europe. And that is a reminder of the shared sacrifice of Britain, America and Canada. And that is what this is about. This is about two countries who, despite their ups and downs, despite their different appreciations of the strength of the relationship, have had a shared history and culture and military history in particular for now decades. It is a celebration of that, a remembrance of that, and a commemoration of that. So it's not about whether or not the Queen likes Donald Trump, or even if the Prime Minister and the government of this country likes Donald Trump. It is about Britain and America celebrating their relationship.
If you're just joining us on BBC World News, just to remind you that you are watching our continuing coverage now that Donald Trump and Melania Trump have touched down on their state visit to the United Kingdom. They are in the air, Marine One helicopter, on their way to Buckingham Palace, where I am joined by Johnny Diamond, our royal correspondent, and Cailin Birch of the Economist Intelligence Unit. And Johnny, we were just talking about the alliances and traditional alliances. There is talk, Cailin, about the special relationship. But certainly when it comes to those traditional security alliances, again, Donald Trump is very forthright about what he wants. He wants, for example, more defence spending on the parts of NATO allies. And again, he's made his menu, his agenda very clear.
Yes, definitely. More spending on security by NATO members is a clear one that will remain on the agenda. But I think probably foremost in his mind at the moment is security strategy toward Iran. The US has tried over the last 6 months, most recently, to kind of drum up support, primarily in Western Europe, but when that failed, we saw several trips to Eastern Europe by senior American officials, Mike Pompeo, the Vice President Mike Pence, to visit Eastern European countries and bring up the two kind of twin concerns, really, Iran and also China and Huawei, trying to get European countries to take a similarly kind of tough tack on those countries.
And actually on
as well.
Iran, we are coming up to another inflection point, aren't we? Because the Iranians said about 30 days ago that we give it 60 days before we feel that we don't have to stand by our obligations.
Right. Iran's put pressure on the EU basically to make sure they can maintain some oil exports to the market. They have asked formally for the EU to ensure they can export 1.5 million barrels a day. We have tanker tracking data at the EIU showing that they are exporting well below 500,000 barrels a day, and that varies from week to week, and sometimes it's much less than that. So Iran at the moment is in dire straits economically, financially. That fiscal and export revenue from oil will be disastrous if it is not recovered. The EU is in now a very difficult position, wanting to preserve the deal and the security assurances that brings, but at the same time not put themselves in hot water with the US, forgive me, if they are then subject to EU sanctions or US sanctions, just as their trade talks are starting to heat up at the same time. The US, I think specifically Trump, given that this is a key policy priority for him, won't hesitate to use one issue over the other. US and Iran is very much still going to be part of the US-EU trade talks, and then the UK is still very much in the mix of that, trying to find where its niche in these talks will be, what its relationship with Europe will be. So it is, in a way, a bit messy, and security will be very much at the top of the agenda.
Difficult time, Johnny, for the UK, simply because we're at this point where we are due to leave the European Union at the end of October. Alliances are shifting. The UK needs to kind of redefine its place in the world.
Yeah, it does. I mean, look, I think there's only so much political capital that the UK has and political energy it has, and right now every ounce of energy is being spent on trying to sort out this terrible, terrible conundrum of how to leave the EU with a deal and how to satisfy various domestic constituencies back in the UK, which all have completely different demands. But picking up on what Caelan said, we talk about the special relationship, that awful hackneyed phrase that British officials pine for every time there's any kind of presidential visit. It's always had ups and downs. It has always had difficulties. There have been times when there have been furious rows between Britain and America. There have been times when they've had fairly divergent policy goals as well. And I think you'll hear quite a lot of that over the next few days in various speeches and toasts and things like that. Reminds us that this isn't about Britain and America walking in lockstep or Britain doing what America says, but about a foundation of a relationship which is based on shared history, shared culture, shared language, shared endeavour. And again, that endeavour we will be reminded of on Wednesday with the commemoration of D-Day, but also that there will be ups and downs. There are always difficulties. There are times when we diverge and times when we come back together again.
Johnny, thank you. And Caelan, for the moment, we can also go now to